A classy black woman just stepping out of the immigration gate was suddenly stopped by two policemen. Without any clear explanation, without any reasonable reason, they looked at her with suspicion. Just a few seconds later, amid the murmurs of the crowd, the woman was forced to turn around, her hands locked in cold handcuffs. Gasps rang out from the surrounding passengers. Some took out their phones to record this unjust scene. Insulting words came from the mouths of the two policemen. "Who do you think you are? A sophisticated con artist? Don't play dumb. We've received a report of a suspicious black woman. You fit the description perfectly." But what they didn't know, the woman they had just insulted was not a criminal, not a fugitive, but it was the one with the power to bring both of these policemen to justice. They just made the biggest mistake of their careers, and they're going to pay the price. And what will be the end of those who abuse power? Let's get into today's story. John F. Kennedy. International Airport is always busy, especially in the immigration area for international flights. The constant flow of people, the mix of loudspeaker announcements, the clatter of suitcases on the floor, and conversations in multiple languages create a characteristically busy atmosphere. At the arrivals gate, passengers filed out after completing immigration procedures. Amidst the crowd, a black woman stood out. Kendra Williams, 41, is one of the most prominent federal prosecutors in the U.S. justice system. She has more than 15 years of experience handling major cases, especially those involving financial crimes and high-level corruption. Kendra is tall, has long black hair, and an angular face that clearly shows sharpness and intelligence. She wears a luxurious suit that exudes power and professionalism. In her hand, Kendra pulls a small black suitcase, while on her shoulder she carries a Louis Vuitton handbag, an accessory that clearly shows the class of a successful woman. After a week-long business trip to London, where she attended a legal conference on international financial crime, Kendra just wanted to get home and rest. She was familiar with the hustle and bustle of JFK Airport, but this time, she had no idea that she was about to face an unthinkable situation. Across the immigration area, Michael Carter and James Reynolds, two airport security officers, stood side by side, scanning the crowd. Both were white cops in their early 40s, with years of experience in the field. But experience did not equate to progressive thinking. Both were accustomed to making judgments based on preconceived notions rather than hard evidence. When a security guard approached, whispering a few words with a tense expression, both men immediately took notice. He announced that there was a suspicious black woman who had just entered the country from London and might be involved in some illegal activity. There was no other specific description, no name, no apparent reason, just a black woman. Michael glanced at James and they both searched the crowd. Soon they spotted Kendra, a well-dressed, confident black woman who stood out from the rest of the passengers. To them, it was a suspicious sight. A successful-looking black woman? To them, that was not normal. James curled his lips slightly and said softly, "There she is. She looks like she has money, but who knows where the money comes from?" Michael nodded, his eyes showing his prejudice. Without checking further, without verifying the source of the report, the two quickly walked towards Kendra, ready to conduct an interrogation. Kendra was stopped as she left the customs area. "Stop, ma'am." Michael's sharp voice sounded behind her. Kendra frowned, but she didn't look surprised. As a black woman in the American legal system, she was no stranger to scrutiny and being treated differently. But this time, she didn't expect to be targeted at the airport simply because of the color of her skin. She turned around slowly. Two policemen stood before her, their eyes cold, their postures filled with the authority of men who believed they held all the power in their hands. "What's wrong?" Kendra asked, her voice calm but authoritative. Michael didn't answer right away. Instead, his eyes quickly swept over her, stopping at the designer bag, the luxurious suit. as if those things made him even more suspicious. "We need you to show us your identification," James said, his tone devoid of any sympathy. Kendra raised an eyebrow, though she was starting to feel uneasy. She knew that security checks were a normal thing, but the way these two were acting made it clear that they weren't just following procedure. "And what is the reason?" Michael crossed his arms, his expression hard. "We have a report of a suspicious black woman who just entered the country. She fits the description." A cold smile crossed Kendra's lips. "Description? And what would that description be other than that I'm a black woman?" James looked a little embarrassed, but quickly regained his composure. "We're just doing our job. If you have nothing to hide, cooperate." The statement made Kendra's blood boil. She had heard too many similar excuses, phrases like, "just doing my job," "just following orders," used to cover up discriminatory behavior. She slowly took her passport from her bag, keeping her gaze steady as she handed it to them. "Well then, check it out." Michael took the passport from Kendra, but instead of examining it carefully, he just glanced at the cover, not bothering to open it to see the information inside. James stood next to him, arms crossed, eyes filled with suspicion, as if he were facing a dangerous criminal. "American citizen?" Michael asked in a skeptical tone. Kendra crossed her arms, her eyes never leaving them. "Yes, and I think that's clear on my passport." Michael smirked, flipping through the pages without really reading the information. He looked up, squinting. "What was your trip to London for?" Kendra kept her voice calm. "Business." James interjected, his voice dry. "In what field?" "Law." Michael sneered. "Law? And what exactly do you do?" Kendra tilted her head slightly, her sharp eyes not missing the mockery in their voices. She knew exactly what they were trying to do, trying to make her feel cornered to find some suspicious sign. "I'm a federal prosecutor," she answered slowly, emphasizing each word. For a split second, the two cops looked at each other. But then, instead of stopping, James burst out laughing, a laugh that was half mocking, half challenging. "A federal prosecutor? That's funny. If someone like you were a federal prosecutor, I'd be the president of the United States." Michael shook his head. "That doesn't sound convincing, ma'am. A federal prosecutor under suspicion at an airport?" Kendra felt a surge of anger run down her spine. She couldn't believe that, even after revealing her identity, she was still being treated like a liar. "If you two doubt me, check my information right now on the system. You have access, right?" But Michael ignored the suggestion. "We have reason to believe you may be carrying contraband or using a false identity." The words cut through the air like a sharp knife. A stifling silence fell. Kendra narrowed her eyes, feeling anger rising inside her. "What are you basing that conclusion on? Do you have any evidence?" James shrugged, smiling coldly. "We don't need proof. We're just doing our job." The words, "we were just doing our job," rang in Kendra's head like a warning bell. She'd heard it too many times in her career. Those who abused their power always found a way to cover up their actions with that phrase. People around started to notice. Some passengers slowed down, turning back to look with curious eyes. A few took out their phones, silently recording videos. They didn't say anything, but their eyes said it all. Indignation, but no one dared to intervene. Kendra took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "You two are abusing your power. Unless you have a good reason, I have the right to leave." But James took a step forward, his face hard. "No, you have no right to do anything." And before Kendra could react, Michael grabbed her arm and yanked her back. "Turn around." Kendra was stunned. "What are you guys doing?" she said, her voice starting to lose its usual calm. James reached down, pulling the handcuffs off his belt, while Michael tightened his grip on Kendra's hands. "You are being detained for investigation." "Investigation about what?" We have reason to believe that you are not being truthful about your identity. We will be conducting a more thorough check at the security checkpoint. You are exceeding your authority. We are just doing our duty." Those words were the last straw. Kendra could not believe that, in the middle of an international airport, among hundreds of people, she, a federal prosecutor, a person who fought for justice, was being treated like a criminal just because of the color of her skin. Cold handcuffs tightened around her wrists. All eyes were on her. Phones are still recording every moment of this injustice. But no one stepped forward. No one intervened. She clenched her teeth, trying not to show the anger that was rising inside her. But the hurt in her eyes was clear. Kendra walked, her wrists cuffed, each step heavier than the last. The two police officers escorted her through the cold corridors of JFK Airport toward the security interrogation area. The passengers around her watched her with mixed looks, some sympathetic, some outraged, but most remained silent. Some continued to record, hoping that the video would tell the truth. Kendra said nothing along the way. She kept her face impassive, but inside a storm of rage was raging. She had fought for justice all her career, but now she herself had become a victim of a system rife with prejudice and abuse. The interrogation room she was placed in was small, with gray walls and cold fluorescent lighting. A metal table sat in the middle, facing two stiff chairs. James roughly uncuffed Kendra and pushed her into the chair. "Sit still here. Don't even think about doing anything stupid," he warned. Kendra crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes never leaving him. "I want to call the federal prosecutor's office immediately." Michael chuckled. "Oh, really? You think we're going to let you call just because you say you're a federal prosecutor?" Kendra tilted her head, her voice cold. "I didn't claim it. It's the truth. And if you don't quickly verify my identity, you will regret it." James laughed, but there was a strained quality to his laughter. He left the room while Michael stood there, arms crossed, watching Kendra as if she were cornered prey. She sat still, silent, but her eyes showed no sign of wavering. She knew that any action she took now could be used against her. She also knew that the truth would soon be revealed, and when that happened, these two policemen would not be able to escape the consequences. A few minutes later, the door opened. An airport security officer walked in, carrying a file in his hand. He was in his early 40s, had short hair, a clean face, and most importantly, he looked more professional than the other two policemen. The moment he saw Kendra, his gaze changed completely. A look of panic crossed his face. He stopped, looked down at the file in his hand, then looked back at Kendra. "What the hell is going on here?" he asked, his voice laced with tension. Michael shrugged, his voice indifferent. "We're holding her for questioning. Any problems?" The security guard stared at Michael, then turned to Kendra, looking confused. "Excuse me, are you, District Attorney Kendra Williams?" Kendra looked at him, nodding slowly. "Yes, and I demand that you verify my identity immediately." The security guard swallowed, quickly pulled out his phone, and walked out of the room. A few minutes later, there was the sound of hurried footsteps outside. Not long after, the door to the room was flung open with force. Two senior officers entered, their faces solemn. One of them, who appeared to be Michael and James's commander, walked over to the table, placed his hands on the cold metal surface, and stared at the two policemen who stood there frozen. "Do you two know what you just did?" His voice was cold and full of anger. Michael and James blinked, still seemingly not understanding what was happening. "The person you just handcuffed and humiliated in the middle of the airport is Kendra Williams, a federal prosecutor, one of the most powerful people in the U.S. justice system." Michael's face turned pale instantly. James was no better, he stuttered, his eyes showing panic. What? Michael took a step back. "She is really a federal prosecutor?" Kendra slowly stood up, straightened her suit, and looked straight at the two policemen with a sharp gaze. There was no longer the anger that had erupted before, but instead a cold, quiet, but terrifying authority. She stepped closer to Michael and James, keeping enough distance so they could feel the pressure from her. "You two just made the biggest mistake of your careers." Her words were not loud, but each word was like a knife stabbing straight into the two policemen's pride. A deadly silence fell over the room. Michael and James did not dare to say another word. They knew that things were beyond their control. Within hours of Kendra leaving the interrogation room, the incident exploded on social media like wildfire. Videos taken by passengers at JFK Airport were posted to Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, quickly racking up millions of views. The footage shows Kendra handcuffed in front of hundreds of people, her face etched with anger and hurt as two white police officers treat her with brutality and contempt. Soon, major media outlets were caught up in the storm. Leading news outlets like CNN, MSNBC, and the New York Times picked up the story. They not only replayed the video, but also delved into the profile of Kendra Williams, a brilliant federal prosecutor who has won numerous cases against major financial corporations and corrupt officials. Articles with shocking headlines flooded the internet. Federal prosecutor racially profiled by police at JFK Airport, The Washington Post. Is the U.S. justice system really fair, when even black prosecutors are not free from discrimination? The Guardian. Blatant abuse of power. Two JFK police officers handcuffed federal prosecutor because of race. NBC News. Public outrage grew. Small protests began in New York, demanding justice for Kendra and calling for police reform. Under pressure from the public, the federal prosecutor's office was forced to act quickly. Within 24 hours of the incident, a formal investigation was opened into the abuse of power and racial discrimination by the two police officers, Michael Carter and James Reynolds. The New York Police Department could not ignore the incident either. An emergency press conference was held, where a police department spokesman attempted to control the damage by stating, "We are committed to reviewing the case fairly and transparently. No one is above the law, including police officers." But those excuses were not enough to calm public anger. For many, this was not just an isolated incident, but emblematic of a serious systemic problem in American law enforcement. And then, within 48 hours, the official decision was made. Michael Carter and James Reynolds were immediately suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. Just a week later, both were fired. They left the police station in disgrace, without a word of defense from superiors or colleagues. Images of their dismissals appeared in the press, and it was soon discovered that Michael Carter had had previous complaints of abuse of power, but had never been severely punished. Kendra didn't just let the media handle the case. She understood that true justice didn't come from headlines or public outrage. It had to come from the legal system. As a victim, Kendra filed a lawsuit against the two police officers and the New York Police Department for violating her civil rights under the Federal Civil Rights Act. The lawsuit alleges that Michael and James not only abused their power, but were also racially motivated, deciding to stop her based solely on the color of her skin without any justification. The U.S. Attorney's Office quickly took over the case, announcing that Michael Carter and James Reynolds would be charged in federal court with two serious crimes: abuse of power in law enforcement, violation of civil rights under the United States Constitution. If convicted, they could face years in prison. Just a few days ago, Michael and James were cocky police officers who thought they could treat a black woman with impunity. But now they were defendants, facing one of the most formidable prosecutors in America, the man they had once insulted and humiliated in the middle of an airport. And Kendra Williams, with all her calm but authoritative presence, was ready to bring them to justice. The trial of Michael Carter and James Reynolds took place under the close watch of the public and media. The federal court in Manhattan became the center of attention of the whole United States when the two police officers were put on trial for abuse of power and violation of civil rights. Hundreds of people gathered outside the courthouse, holding signs demanding justice for Kendra Williams. Major media outlets were present, recording live, updating every development of the trial. Millions of people across the United States followed the event on television and social media. Inside the courtroom, the 12-member jury sat solemnly, listening to the lawyers argue. The judge was a prominent figure in the judicial system, known for his harsh rulings on cases of abuse of power by law enforcement. Prosecutors present powerful evidence in court. Video footage from JFK Airport takes center stage. A large screen in the courtroom showed Michael and James blocking Kendra's path without just cause, repeatedly treating her in an offensive manner, and finally handcuffing her in front of hundreds of onlookers. Several witnesses, passengers present at the airport that day, were summoned to testify. A white man stood up, his voice filled with indignation. "I saw everything from the beginning. There was no reason for them to stop her, other than she was a well-dressed black woman. They had no evidence, no specific reason, just prejudice." Another middle-aged woman, who recorded the video on her phone, even teared up as she recounted what she witnessed. "I felt terrible. She wasn't resisting, she didn't do anything wrong, and yet they handcuffed her like she was a criminal. If they can do that to a federal prosecutor, what about us regular people?" The courtroom became tense as Michael and James's defense attorneys tried to argue that they were simply following standard security procedures, but sharp questioning from the prosecutor quickly disproved that argument. What security procedure allows you to handcuff a person just because she has a different skin color than you? If it was a white woman dressed in finery, would you have behaved the same way? Michael and James bowed their heads, unable to answer. After several days of deliberation, it took the jury less than 3 hours to reach a verdict: guilty. Michael Carter and James Reynolds were sentenced to 4 years in prison for abuse of power and racial discrimination under federal law. There was a tense silence in the courtroom as the judge announced the verdict. Michael, always confident and arrogant, now had no color left in his face. He shook his head, unable to believe what was happening. James bowed his head, as if he had given up all hope. Outside the courthouse, cheers rang out as the verdict was announced. Hundreds of people clapped and celebrated as if this was not just a victory for Kendra Williams, but a victory for justice. After the trial ended, Kendra stood at the podium outside the courthouse, where dozens of reporters were waiting. Cameras were trained on her, capturing the momentous moment. She looked straight into the crowd, her eyes strong and full of authority. "Today, we have demonstrated that no one is above the law, not even those tasked with enforcing it. I am not the first person to be discriminated against, and sadly, I will not be the last. But today, we sent a clear message. Anyone who uses their badge to abuse their power, to oppress others because of the color of their skin, will be held accountable. Justice is not a privilege. Justice is a right, and we must continue to fight to protect it." The crowd erupted in applause. Kendra's words quickly went viral, becoming a powerful statement about equality and anti-racism in the legal system. Kendra walked down the courthouse steps, steady and proud. On the other side, Michael and James were escorted into the police car. Their faces were dark, their eyes lowered to the ground, avoiding the cameras of dozens of reporters. The car doors closed. The car drove away, taking them to a place they never thought they would end up in, a federal prison. Meanwhile, Kendra Williams, the woman who was humiliated at the airport because of her skin color, left the courthouse with her head held high, because she fought and she won. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If you like this content, please click like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next meaningful stories, because tomorrow we will have another meaningful story for you.